Hello, everybody. So sorry about that. I had a few technical difficulties getting the webinar started. I know we are a couple minutes in already, so thank you everybody for being patient. I think everybody is being a little bit more patient these days in the new work from home reality anyway, but thank you so much. And welcome to this monthly installment of our training webinar series. So glad that you guys could join us here today. This session should be a little bit different from some of our, I guess I should say, typical training sessions. Of course, last month we definitely did a different sort of installment. But given what's going on right now, we do have a lot of clients who are perhaps for the first time really digging into using automation to engage with their donors and with their supporters in a more holistic way. And because of that, we've had a lot more questions coming in about how to build automations or how to use automation. And so we wanted to offer this session as an opportunity to do that. So I want to make sure that we do have some time for some Q&A, maybe some expanded Q&A here towards the end. And we also wanted to look at a few things that can trip you up sometimes when you're just getting started with automation. So that's what we have on tap for today. Before we get into all of that, first things first, as usual, we are recording today's presentation. We will make that available on the Training Academy page in Virtuous, as you can go back and watch any of our recorded training webinars. Now, to do that, everyone has been muted. That way we can try to get some good audio for today. But if you do have a question, and again, especially today, want to make sure we can address those questions, you should see the little Q&A box there in the in the Zoom controls, excuse me. I feel like one thing right now, everybody's really getting the hang of using Zoom. But you can go ahead and type in that question, and then we'll go ahead and address those. I know I have had one or two clients who have sent questions in to me through a few other channels, so I've got some questions already, even before we get to the Q&A. So we'll try to address as much as we can in the time that we have for today. Okay, now for anyone who does not know me, my name is Scott Richards. I'm the Director of Training and Education here at Virtuous. Excited to talk to you again this month. And in terms of our agenda for today's session, we still want to take just a brief look at some of the latest release features, as always, that came out in our last release here in Virtuous. And then we want to look at some of that featured content. What sort of things should you automate, right? If you are getting started for the first time with automation, what are some good use cases for automation? How should I deploy it? What do I want to build in here? And then again, we'll look at some common workflow pitfalls. These are the kinds of things that you might not think about, at least at first blush, but they are the kinds of things that can take your workflow and kind of throw a wrench into it or throw a spanner into the works, depending on what sort of phraseology you'd like to use. Okay, and then again, we want to have some open time here to ask the trainer. Send in those questions. Again, if you've come in with a question, you've got one loaded up that you're wondering about, throw it into the Q&A box right now. That way we'll make sure we have some time to address that. And then we'll wrap things up here for another month. Okay, so really briefly, some of these newer features that we have here in Virtuous. The first one is our new Zapier integration. Some of you may have already noticed this in the release notes. Some of you may have been waiting for it, and if so, that's great. We do have a new integration with Zapier. So if we switch over here to our browser view, up here I do have a tab loaded up with Zapier. You can go to zapier.com/apps/virtuous-crm, or you can go to Zapier. You can just search for Virtuous, and you'll be able to see that on there. So now you've got another integration option for connecting Virtuous to other applications that you use. Those of you that have been around for a little while, we're pretty good with other people playing in our sandbox. And we do have an open API. Anyone can go look at our endpoints. If you have in-house developer resources, they can build an integration or a connection to talk to Virtuous. But now you can use Zapier to go in and build an automation. It's a lot more lightweight, doesn't need the same sort of developer know-how to connect Virtuous to any of the other apps that also have a Zapier integration. You can search for other apps to see what you can connect to Virtuous and even how you might be able to connect those two. You can see what triggers and actions are available and things like that. So a new, more extensible integration option for having other applications talk to Virtuous proper. Okay. Oh, I just saw we had a question come in through the chat. If you send a question in through the chat, that is fine. We'll try to catch those too. But please do try to throw those in through that Q&A, and then we'll go ahead and try to address those during that Q&A period. Okay. Now, one of the other features that just came out in our recent release is the addition of some new best practice queries. These are some things we've been getting asked for actually for a while now. In particular, 2 queries that now you can quickly use, and you can even combine with other queries as you're building automations and also workflows. So if you go to the best practice query tab, you'll see 2 new queries. One is for your Libunts last year, but unfortunately not this year, and for your Sybunts some year, but unfortunately not this year. 2 groups that people frequently want to be able to identify. Now you can identify them quickly. And again, you can also use these as nested queries and in building other more elaborate queries that you can use to power your workflows. And the other thing I just wanted to point out very briefly is the new report that's available from the dashboard. That is the brand new, not really brand new, I suppose, but the now the new pledge payment report. So similar to the ability to look at the recurring gift payment report, now you can also report on pledge payments. So expected payments specifically for pledges. Which ones have come in already? Which ones have not? Which ones are you expecting to come in the near future? You have the ability to filter this by project or project type. You can also filter by segment. So if you'd like to see all of the pledges that were received at a particular event, for example, it's easy for you to do that. Just filter by segment or by frequency. And then, of course, the time frame here, this would be the time frame when those payments are expected to come in. So maybe I want to expand this and look at what I'm expecting for the remainder of this year as far as pledge giving. I can run that, and there I can see. So here are all the different pledge payments that are expected and the expected dates, the status on all of these pledges here. I can see one of them's actually been paid pretty much in advance here for August. There we go. And then for this, I can also download this report. And this report has in it the contact name, the informal name, the address, the pledge amount, expected payment and date, and the balance, and everything else, so that if you wanted to use this to do a mail merge, to send pledge reminders or statements to some of your pledge givers, you can. Okay. I can already see questions coming in, which is fantabulous. So I want to make sure that we do get a chance to dive into all the automation stuff. So just a quick look at some of those new features. But first, here, let's make sure that we do take a look at a couple of these examples here. What should I automate? Now, the short answer to this is whatever you want, right? We've had several installments of this training webinar series already where we've looked at a lot of different use cases for automation, using automation to manage the data in your database, update tags and custom fields and the like, to use automation to automate internal processes like major donor prospect identification and driving the cultivation process. When should they get a call from their new MGO? When do they get an introductory email, etc.? So you've got those. We've also got automations for certainly new donors. We've even looked at automating, for example, nurture series and driving automation, not just off of giving activity or event activity, but off of activity directly within an email. Hey, who opened the email, clicked on the donate button, but did not donate? Then I want to send them a follow-up email. There are all sorts of things you can do with automation. And so you can get some of that sort of initial paralysis where you say, you know what, we're going to dive in and we're going to automate things, but I have no idea what I should build first. I have no idea what I should do first. And that's totally fine. So a couple of things that you can do with automation, some simple things. Number one, automation is a great way to celebrate different donor milestones, right? Birthdays, really easy. I mean, on my birthday, I get an email from a dentist I don't even go to anymore and a few other places. And, I don't even have a real personal connection to some of those businesses. Nonprofits that I'm involved in, I do care about them. And I'd love to hear from them on my birthday. Same thing. Your donors have a much more personal connection to you than they do to most of the brands and other stores and businesses they interact with. So sending them something to say happy birthday or to celebrate their giving anniversary. Hey, you've been a donor for 4 years. Fantastic. Those are great things to do through automation. Okay. And again, those are things that you're probably trying to do manually anyway. Great things to be able to have the system do for you. One of the other things would be first-time donors. And to be honest, this is actually the #1 most impactful automation that you can create, right? Because first-time donors, that's really crucial in terms of being able to retain those first-time donors. We know now there's tons of data out there, about 75%, 78%, depends on the study you look at, of first-time donors do not go on to give a second gift. And there's all sorts of reasons why that happens. So if you can create an automation so that when someone does make that first gift, you engage with them right away and you communicate to them the impact of their gift and you keep them engaged with the organization, once you can get them to a second gift, your retention numbers go way up. Now I have a much better chance to keep them around long term. So that first-time donor engagement, that's a really big one. If you're looking for, hey, what's the best ROI that I can get in terms of deploying my very first automation, that would be the first one that I would look at. Okay. Now, the other thing you can do, and we talked about this in terms of major giving or managing some of your data, identify the internal processes, the things you're already doing that take up time, that can't really scale. You can't just have more people do that thing. And then figure out, well, which ones of those can we have Virtuous drive for us instead, right? Really easy way to do that is things like tagging and identifying major donors. Everybody's got their own definition for what a major donor means. A certain threshold for life-to-date giving amount, certain threshold for largest gift amount. And when someone hits that threshold, a lot of times I know a lot of development directors will have a saved query or something. They'll go in once a week and see, hey, who hit this threshold that we haven't talked to yet? Well, let Virtuous monitor that and add the tag when someone hits that threshold and ping you with a task to reach out or to review that donor when it happens. So instead of you having to go in and run those queries and manage all that every day, Virtuous is going to take care of it for you and let you know when that happens. Right? Virtuous will update those records. Any of those types of manual processes, identify the ones that you can have Virtuous do. Then your staff, your team, and you can have more time to actually connect with your donors, right? This right now, as crazy as things are in the world, it's actually a great time to connect with your donors. When you call them, there's a pretty darn good chance they're at home and you can get them on the phone, right? It's a great chance to have an ear-to-ear conversation with some of your major donors and really kind of deepen that relationship with them. Give yourself the freedom and the time to do that by having Virtuous manage some of the other day-to-day things for you. Okay, so just a couple of things that you can automate. Again, you can automate all kinds of stuff under the sun. I've talked to so many clients who have automated different processes or different streams of communication, different types of outreach. But these are some great places to start. Okay. So now I want to look at a couple of common pitfalls, a couple of things that can trip people up right out of the gate when you're building a workflow. And a lot of this you're going to see is rooted in query logic. Whenever I talk to people about workflows, the actual workflow itself, right? The process of what's going to happen in the workflow. Yeah, there's some things going on in there you need to understand. But so much of this really goes back to the query and the query tool. That's really where you have the power and the control over your workflow. And that's really where some of these things can kind of trip you up here. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of these common pitfalls. Now, the first one is a pitfall that I call no day but today. And so I've got some workflows in here built for all of these things. Let's go ahead and look at our automation tool. Okay, and you can see I got a lot of crazy workflows in here. Ooh, boy. Skipped ahead one screen. There we go. So here's our no day but today workflow. So this we can see it's a pretty straightforward workflow. Okay, and so it's a thank you workflow. It's based on saying thank you to donors who are making a gift. So when a gift comes in, I'm going to send this thank you email, and Fozzie Bear here is going to get a task to give them a thank you call. Great way to use automation, great use case for it. So instead of you having to pull a report and do whatever, hey, Virtuous is going to let you know who has to get a thank you call, and even without having to wait for the thank you call, it can at least send the thank you email immediatamente. Right? It has a great impact. Now, if we take a look at our query here, we can see that this is a nested query. Right? Remember, you can use nested queries to pull in data from gift queries, from event queries or event invitation queries, volunteer queries, all kinds of other query types that you can plug in here, recurring gift queries, etc. Because fundamentally, if I have a contact workflow, we know I need a contact query. If I have an individual workflow, I need an individual query. So here, we've got our contact query looking at this gift query over here called no gift date but today. So if we go to the query tool and we search for no gift date, let's just use that. Here's our no gift date but today query. And this is looking for gifts where the gift date is after yesterday. Makes total sense. All the gifts that come in today, I want to trigger an automation, and I want this to send out communication. And when you build this, you might even come in and run this query and you'll see some results. Hey, look, I got 10 gifts that are dated for today, right? Gift date, create date, either or. But either way, and here, even if I switch this to create date, same problem is going to exist. This automation will actually never pull in contacts. Right? Maybe it'll get one or two. The odds are pretty low, though. And the problem here, the pitfall, is remembering that automation is a process that runs very early in the morning, usually around like 5 a.m. or so. And at 5 a.m., I generally don't have a lot of gifts in the database yet for that day, especially if I'm looking at create date. I'm not going to import gifts maybe until 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. And so when this runs at 5 a.m., there are no gifts dated for today yet. And this is a tricky one to uncover. And I've seen clients run into this. Okay, all these examples are real world examples that I've kind of abstracted here a little bit. But it's tough to troubleshoot because at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, if you say, gee, why didn't this run? And you run that query, heck, you're going to get all the gifts you created today or that were dated for today. They're going to show up. But again, the trick is they're not there in the morning when automation runs. Okay, so if I want to do something like this, and again, it's a great way to use automation. If I want to trigger a workflow off of a new gift or gift activity so I can say thank you, instead of looking for gifts where the date is after yesterday, right, gift date or create date, depending on what I'm looking for here, my recommendation is always to say that the gift date is after last Sunday. That's going to give you some leeway there, right? Gift could come in anywhere in the past week, essentially, for you to be able to trigger that workflow and reach out to that donor. Okay. So again, anytime you're using the date after yesterday, meaning I'm looking for something that's today, you want to remember if it's looking for activity, there's usually not much activity during the day yet at the time that automation runs. Okay. So that's number one. Pitfall number two, a little thing I'm calling time's up. Okay, so we'll go in here back to our workflows. And here's time's up. Woo, look at that. So I've got this query in here called out of time. Okay, and for that out of time query, I think I ended up creating multiple queries for this, not really sure why. But I got this out of time query, and it looks amazing, this query, or this workflow, right? Hey, gift comes in, I'm going to send a thank you email, and then I'm going to wait about 6 days, then I'm going to send this second email talking about other ways they can get involved, and then after 5 days, they're going to get this awesome letter in the mail. We're going to use letters on demand to put something in their mailbox. And then after 14 days, I'm going to have someone make an outreach call to that donor and talk to them. So, hey, great, got a whole stream of communication going on here. That's totally good. And then I look at that query and it says, just what we said, right? Last gift date is after last Sunday, or the last pass-through gift date is after last Sunday. Great. I'm excluding major donors here because they're going to get maybe some special communication. That's fantastic. Now, the problem with this particular workflow is not that it's never going to run. Okay. Unfortunately, though, I've got all this other cool stuff that happens after that first email. No one's ever going to get any of that stuff. Because here, while I am looking at gifts that have come in since the last Sunday, so anywhere in the last week, well, then I'm delaying 6 days. And so by the time I get to this next email in the sequence, pretty much everybody's going to have aged out of this query. They no longer match to the query by the time I get to that second email in the cycle. So they're never going to get that email. They're never going to get the cool letter that I created. And Fozzie Bear is never going to give them a phone call because they aged out of that query. Okay, so that's the trick with a workflow like that. If you're going to put a date parameter, you're going to put a time boundary on your workflow step, you want to make sure that all of the actions are going to fit into that window. If I was looking at gifts in the last 30 days, for example, then there's no problem. They're going to get all these things and they're going to fit into that 30-day window. But here, I've exceeded the time limit. So again, I built some cool stuff. No one's ever going to get it. Okay, so just another way you can kind of trip up sometimes there. Okay, so here's another one here, which is you can't stay here. Okay, so we'll take a look at that one. Here's can't stay here. Take a look at that workflow. Groovy. So this particular workflow, okay, is looking to identify someone who's just made their second gift. So I can send them a thank you, give them a repeat donor thank you, tell them other ways they can get involved. Great idea, right? Hey, someone who's just gone beyond. Remember, we talked about first-time donor is really impactful. So now, if I've given them a bunch of communication about how to engage with us and about the impact of their gift, because they gave their first gift and now they give a second gift, I got to make sure that I'm getting just as excited and thanking them for that second gift, right? I want them to stick around. And so here you can see this is, we kept this pretty simple. Last gift date is within the last 30 days, and their first gift date was before that time frame, okay? And the tag is none of repeat donor. I don't want someone who's already been identified as having given their second gift. Now, if you take a look at this, on the surface of it, it might look really good. However, the very first thing that we're doing in this particular workflow step is we're tagging them as repeat donor. Cool, I want to identify those folks. Hey, they were a repeat donor. That's awesome, okay? The first thing that the thing that I'm excluding from my query here is anybody with that repeat donor tag. So that means someone's going to match to this query when they make that second gift, right? They already had a gift more than 30 days ago. They make another gift within that 30-day time frame. Cool. Sorry, stealing a sip of water there. So I'm going to tag them as a repeat donor. I'm going to send them this email that says, hey, thank you so much. This is great. The next step is, or the next action, is a delay. So it's going to stop right there. Next morning, it's going to run that query. Well, anybody who went through this is now going to have that repeat donor tag. So right here, they're going to stop, right? They'll never make it past that. They'll never, again, Fozzie, poor Fozzie, never gets to call anybody. He's not going to get that task. They're never going to get this other email because I've invalidated this right up at the beginning. I added that tag that I'm excluding from my query. So to fix this, there's two things that I could do, right? Either A, I don't exclude folks based on that tag, if that's what I want to do. That's perfectly valid because maybe I want to see that tag on someone when I look at their record and know that's where they are in the process. Or the other option is I add this tag at the end. And if I do that, no problems. As a matter of fact, that's ideal because that's going to unenroll them at the end of all this stuff. so that I know that they're out of this workflow now and they're pretty good to go. Okay. So again, that's something that we've seen before, that whole can't stay here problem, where I do something in the workflow that is counter to the query that I've built. Okay. So now, the next pitfall is the run against who now? Who am I running this against? Okay. You can tell I had to come up with some interesting names just so I could find some of these workflows in here, right? Otherwise, I would have been stuck. Run against who now? What am I doing? So here we've got this set up with a query. And this query is looking for folks who have given one gift. We're a pretty small org. So for us, someone who could be a large giver has given at least a $400 gift. So I want everybody who's only given one gift in their lifetime, and it was over $400, and it happened in the last 90 days. I've decided that those folks, I want to have someone on my development team, maybe a gift officer, try to engage with them and see if, hey, their unsolicited gift was $400. What happens if we cultivate them a little bit better, connect with them, build a better relationship? Not a bad thing to do, okay? And up here, I say, okay, great, this is fantastic. That's what I want to do. I could even come in here and run enrollment if I want to. Remember, running enrollment is a great way to test your workflow before you turn it on. It's going to run all the queries. It's going to come back and it's going to give you accounts. And it's going to tell you, hey, if you were to turn this thing on right now, here's what would happen. So now this came back and it gave us our counts and it says, okay, here you go, boss. 0 context. Nobody's going to be in this right now. And I think, wait a minute. When I run this query, I get 36 contacts. So that seems weird. Why are none of them enrolled, right? Here's good old Kevin Flynn. This reference probably dates me a little bit, but here he is. So Kevin Flynn is in here. He's given a $450 gift on March 4th, 2020. That's his only gift. Well, shoot, I mean, he looks like exactly who I'm looking for. This one can be tricky, okay? And when you look at this on the face of it, you might say, man, something's wrong. And the trick here is it's actually not in the query that I have a problem, okay? Instead, if I went back to the main automation screen here, and I look at the settings for this particular workflow, you're going to see that I've added a parameter here where I want to run this only against new records. And I define new as being anybody who's created after April 1st, 2020. So while Kevin Flynn's giving activity certainly matches what I'm looking for, his record was created back in March 4th, 2020. So this workflow is functioning exactly as it was designed. It's only looking for new records who are created after the beginning of April of this year. And that could be perfectly valid. Maybe that's what I want to do, right? I only want to identify those new records that meet that criteria because I haven't engaged with them very much yet. Totally fine. So this isn't necessarily a pitfall to say, hey, my workflow is built in correctly. The pitfall here is if you're expecting someone like this, like Kevin Flynn, to show up in this workflow, they're not going to because of that run against parameter. And then it's easy enough to say, hey, I'm going to back that up, right? I'm going to change that to say anybody created after January 1st of this year is who I really want to target, from now going forward. Totally fine if that was the intent, right? The intent here really tells us whether this is, say, a mistake or whether it just is something that is confusing to troubleshoot based on the way it looks. Okay. So the other sort of pitfall here I want to talk about, and this one's a little bit trickier, I will say, and then we'll get some of your questions. I got tons of great questions coming in. So this one is what I'm calling unenroll to re-enroll. This involves our favorite setting, good old allow re-enrollment. Allow re-enrollment. So remember, when I allow re-enrollment, right, that says that someone can go through a particular workflow step more than once. Really what that means is someone can go through a particular action more than once. Okay, if I am allowing re-enrollment, then if someone matches to the query, they can get this particular email, or they can get this thank you call more than once. That's what that means. So here, we've got another giving follow-up workflow. You can see these are pretty common. Wanting to reach out to folks after they give. That's one of those donor signals that you want to listen for. The easiest one, quite frankly, to listen for, right, is what do they give you? And so here, we've got this query, and this query is pretty broad. It just says, hey, their last gift or pass-through gift was given after January 1st, 2020. So maybe that's when I started this workflow and I said, hey, if they give a gift anywhere after that, I want these things to happen. I want to send them a thank you. I want Fozzie Bear to give them a call, and then I'm going to delay 7 days, and then we're good. Then they're done. Okay. And because I want them to be able to have this happen more than once, I'm going to allow re-enrollment. Re-enrollment is often used in giving follow-up or responses to giving activity workflows, because I want the thank you call or the email or whatever not only to happen the first time someone makes their gift, I want them to get that kind of attention every time they make a gift. Now, here's the trick. Remember, if I allow re-enrollment, someone matches to the query, they can go through a particular action more than once. Now, on the face of it, the way this looks is like I've created an infinite loop, right? Because I'm saying, hey, anytime they've given a gift after January 1st, just keep it going. Well, that would say if someone gives a gift in February 10th, hey, the next day they're going to get enrolled in this workflow, they're going to get the email, they're going to get this thank you call, then 7 days. And then after that, well, hey, they've still given a gift after January 1st, so go back, repeat until that person either unsubscribes or, tells us to go away. But the tricky thing with re-enrollment is in order for someone to re-enroll, they first have to unenroll. So they first have to stop matching to the query in order to come back in. And here, because they're never going to stop matching that query, they'll never go back through this sequence again. So I've created a different issue. It's not that they're stuck in an infinite loop, but they're not going to get a thank you the next time they give. If they were a monthly donor, they gave in February 10th, and then they gave again on March 10th, there's no thank you email and there's no thank you task. Okay. And the way that I explain this, I actually was just talking about this with someone the other day, and I said, so you want to imagine a buffet line. Okay. Everybody's been to a buffet. Maybe you've been to one in kind of like a crowded room. I had a cousin who got married like in an old house. The buffet was in this old room, kind of crowded. And if you allow re-enrollment, well, first, if you don't allow re-enrollment, that means everybody's only allowed to serve themselves one time from each tray. That's it, right? You can have one helping of potatoes au gratin and, one piece of turkey or roast beef, whatever the heck. If I allow re-enrollment, that says, hey, you're allowed to take seconds and thirds. You can help yourself to as many of the potatoes as you want. However, in order to do that, you have to leave the line. You have to go back to the beginning. What do they always tell you? Get a clean plate, right? So I got to leave the line. I got to go back to the beginning. I got to get a clean plate. Then I can come through and help myself to some more potatoes, some more ham, some more whatever the heck is in that buffet. And then if I want to get I want to get thirds, hey, I got to leave the line. I got to go back to the beginning. Got to get a new clean plate. I got to come through again. Automation is the same way. So if someone is enrolled, if they're sitting there in the line with a full plate of food and they know they're allowed to go get more, but they don't leave the line, they're never going to go get a clean plate. They're never going to come through and get a second helping. It doesn't work that way. Okay, that's how unenrollment and re-enrollment work together. So just remember that in particular. If you want to use re-enrollment, and again, it's a great tool for something like a giving follow-up workflow, I've got to set up a workflow where someone can potentially unenroll in order for them to then re-enroll. So if I'm doing a gift follow-up, right, if I'm going to do that sort of thing, this is a great place for having a query that instead of using last gift date greater than blah, 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 this is where you could use after last Sunday. Same thing for this one right down here, after last Sunday. Okay, that gives me a limit, right? Maximum about 7 days. And then just to cover our bases in here, we're sending the email, we're creating the task, and we have a 7-day delay. So just in case something wacky happens, they still can't cycle back through in that same week. And then once they've gotten past that mark, they've gotten into the next week, well, hey, they don't match the query, they're unenrolled. Now they're fair game. So next time they make their monthly gift, they can be re-enrolled and they'll get a thank you all over again. Okay, I know that one's kind of a tricky one, a little bit more conceptual. But again, these are all things that we've seen can kind of be some tricky things when you're dealing with workflows. Okay, we've got a ton of questions, which is exciting. That's what we want to do. So I want to dive into a lot of these questions here. So first things first, I did have a question come in that asked about manually removing someone from a workflow. Right, and maybe the issue is that you're sending a stream of communication to somebody, right? So for example, maybe I'm doing this donor lifecycle one here. And this has this cycle of 5 emails in step 1, right? And maybe they've been on the website, they filled out a lead form, they did all of that, and then they ended up in the database. They got email number 1. 3 days later, I got a task, give them a welcome call. And when I give them that welcome call, they're like, look. I didn't mean to sign up. I don't want to, you've been sending me these emails, say like, hi, nice to meet you. I don't want to get any more email from you. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do it in the first place. I don't actually like you. Now, again, are they going to do that? Probably not. But if they did, and I needed to take them out of this sequence of emails, I needed them to stop getting these emails, how could I do that? Well, I can't come in here and say, well, I got 365 contacts in here. Let's get Wendy Darling and just pull her out. Doesn't work that way. The only way someone can leave a workflow step or a workflow entirely is if they stop matching to the query. That's it. It's the only way to take them out, okay? So I have 2 options at this point. I could either have built my query in such a way that it is excluding people who have an opt-out tag. Someone who said, leave me alone. Okay, so tag is none of, opt out. That's easy. Because then if Wendy Darling does call me on the phone and say, hey, stop, I don't want this. If I go to her record and I add that tag, opt out, the next morning when automation runs, she doesn't match the query. She's out. She's good. The other thing is Wendy could unsubscribe. She could choose to unsubscribe from the emails when she receives them. Remember that workflow emails still have email lists associated with them. So she can unsubscribe from that list or globally unsubscribe. Or I could go to Wendy's record and I could unsubscribe her from email. Remember, you can do that yourself as well. Anybody who's on an email list, I can go to their contact record. So my friends, Harry and Sally McSample here. We'll open that in a new tab. If I go to Harry and Sally's record and they said, hey, look, I'd stop sending me these emails. Okay, I can go down to email lists here, and for my general communication, I can come in here and I could say, hey, they both want to unsubscribe, and I can take them off that list. So those would be 2 ways to kind of stop that stream of communication. But again, automation is automation. The system is driving it, and the system is using queries to determine who is going to match to these workflow steps. So the only way to take them out is to make sure they either don't match to the query anymore or to unsubscribe them from email. Okay. So we have a question here about adding some new relative date parameters, I think to queries. I know it mentions automations outside of what already exists. So we've looked at some things that have date parameters on them, right? Create date is one. Remember, when you choose your operator on a query like this, you have your greater than and less than. Those are related to hard calendar dates. Before and after let you trigger things off of relative dates here, right? And here I could say after 1 year ago, after 2 years ago, after this calendar year, 30, 60, 90, 180, 270. So I've got a few different options in there for my rolling dates. At this time, we don't have plans to add anything like 16 months or 19 months or 18 months or 2.5 years or anything like that. If I am doing something that has that type of time limit on it or time frame on it, the only way I could do that within a workflow might be to say, hey, the query is going to look for, let's say your last gift date was after 1 year ago, right? And then in my workflow, I might build in a delay of 180 days. That kind of moves me then from 1 year ago to a year and a half ago, right? So 18 months. So there are some creative ways to get around that, at least for now. I just have to combine the delays in my workflow with the parameters in my query, right? Or 2 years ago, something like that. There are some ways to do that. Let's see. So here's a question about double the donation integration. How can I include a link to check the possibility of doubling on my thank you letters or receipts for those that give via snail mail? So there's actually not a need for that. So this is the thing when it comes to double the donation. And we can bring up, we've got our support article here too on double the donation. We can bring that bad boy up right here. So for those of you that are using it or maybe are wondering about using it, something like that, Double the Donation is a Virtuous partner. Okay, they have this product 360 Match Pro. You can integrate that through Virtuous and you can actually sign up for it right through Virtuous. Nice thing is you don't have sort of a license fee when you do it that way. And this is a tool that tries to help identify possible matching gift options to make it easier to bring that in. Okay. And when you set up that integration here, then you can add that to a donation form. So someone could go in and say, hey, I work at the Home Depot. Let's see. Cool. Maybe they'll match my gift. But in addition to that, we do match any gift that's processed through the gift and contact import tool. All of that actually gets screened and matched against the double the donation system. So even if someone wrote a check, it didn't come through a donation form, the system is automatically going to be looking for matching possibilities there too, right? And then they may be getting communication, email communication about how to get their gift matched. Those emails are something you can customize in your double the donation account, okay? But that means that you wouldn't have to add a separate step or a separate link, for example, to a receipt for someone to try to identify a matching gift or a possible matching gift, because it's already being done as part of the import process. It's part and parcel of the integration. Okay. So we have a question, is there a way to automatically add someone who has responded to a lead form to a workflow, right? An email registration from your website, 100%. That's kind of a pretty straightforward use case of automation. And so the question is, again, well, what parameters are you using to identify those people specifically that went through that lead form, right? And remember, a lead form on your website is kind of a tricky thing because you put it out there on your website, you don't always control who fills it out. Maybe they're already in your database. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're brand new. So do I want this to apply to anybody who fills out that lead form no matter what? Do I only want it to apply to new contacts who fill out that lead form? How do I want to approach that? Okay. But the easiest way is when you create your lead form, you can do one of two things. Here, let's take a look at Virtuous Marketing. We'll open that up in another tab. You can flip back and forth here. I've got an awful lot of lead forms in here. You can tell. Here, let's just look at this one here. Here's today's lead form. So I might have a couple of things going on with this lead form. Maybe I've got the email preferences on here for them to say they want to get certain types of email. Remember that I could give them the option. Okay, so I could just have those on there as checkboxes. Maybe I add a little help text, how would you like to hear from us? That's not a word. Great. When I go and preview that, Here's that looks like, hey, we're asking you, how would you like to hear from us? Do you want general communication? Do you want to get our newsletter? Do you want event announcements? Cool. Submit that. That'll add them to all 3 of those email lists. Okay, and then maybe anybody who gets added to that email list, I have an automation that I want to put them through. It says, welcome aboard. Totally easy. I might also be doing this based on a custom field that I've added, either at the contact or individual level. That gets automatically applied when they fill out this particular form. Okay, there's all kinds of ways that I can add custom fields to a form like this one. This is a volunteer form here, and I could say, hey, this is a true false. It's a checkbox. I'm going to check it by default, and I'm going to hide it. So this is a volunteer form, for example, or a form asking if someone would be interested in volunteering someday. Anyone who fills it out, I want to add this volunteer is true to their record, and anybody who has that field added, I'm going to query for those folks, and I'm going to put them into a workflow. Okay. If I know that I'm basing this solely off of new contact create, remember that for your lead form, you can tie an origin segment code to that lead form. Then I could query for anybody who has that origin segment code. There'd be new people who get that origin segment applied, and I'm going to take step A, B, C, or D with them, right? Whatever it is that I want to do in that workflow. So there's all sorts of ways that you can trigger this based off of a lead form or a lead form fill out. Again, the question is, who, in terms of filling out that form, do you specifically want to target? What's the parameter that you're going to use to identify them? And then you can go ahead and you can build a query to find those folks. Okay. So I had a question here. What are some best practices in setting up workflows for tribute messaging, communications, and actions? So I would need to dig in more on that in terms of tribute. If we're talking about tribute giving, someone who's given in memory or in honor of someone, right? Something like that. If that's the case, I can identify those tribute givers. Same thing, right? Here, I'm going to have to use a nested query, okay? Because the only place that that tribute information exists is on the gift itself. And so to identify folks who have given a recent tribute gift, right, I can build a gift query. Let's say I'm looking for gifts that get, as they get added to the database. Create date is after, say, last Sunday, and tribute is set. Okay. Is set or is not set means that field contains information or does not contain information. So I want anybody who's given a gift where there's tribute information. If I want it to be specific tribute information or a specific name, I could say is and put in the value. If I just want anybody who's given a tribute gift of any type, I could say tribute is set. Then I would use the same nested query function that we looked at the beginning to say, I'm going to build a contact query for contacts in this gift query. Okay, and then from there, I can send them a stream of communication. When you're talking about someone who's given a gift in memory or in honor of someone, we know that there is no direct connection to your organization, the same way that there is with someone who's just given you a gift outright. So in those cases, you do want to, just like with a first-time donor, you want to follow up and you want to, again, you can't thank them too much, right? But you also have to approach this as a new, almost like a new donor acquisition, new cultivation, where you kind of have to introduce them, introduce yourselves to them, who you are and what you do and how you could help them make a positive impact or a positive difference in the world. So in terms of the stream of communication, it's kind of messaging that you want to use. But to identify those gifts, you would just start from a gift query, nest it into a contact query. Okay, this is great. So we have a question here about, oh man, there's so many questions. This is fantastic. I have a question about handling automation needs some if-then logic. Example, if I want tasks within an automation assigned to the solicitor responsible for a particular donor, there are multiple reps and all donors are assigned to one of the reps. The task of the automation needs to be assigned to a responsible rep. How can that be done? Fantastic question. The answer to that, remember, the only place that you have to control all of these different variables is your query. Okay, that's it. That's where you can control these variables. So if I wanted to do that, and let's see, I've got, I'm pretty sure, an example of major donor here. Should be this major donor pipeline. Let's try that one out. Hey, here we go. So this has a few additional components to it. It's identifying someone as a major donor suspect, tagging them for qualification. My prospect manager is going to qualify them and then assign them to a portfolio. And then here I've got multiple steps. This one just has 2, okay? But you'd have to look at this as for, however many MGOs you have, 5, 6, that's 5 or 6 steps, okay? I need a step for each of those options. Because then in the query, I can say this is only for contacts who are in Fozzie's group, Fozzie's portfolio. They're only for people who are in this portfolio, okay? And then I can assign the task. So you can see that these steps are mostly the same here. Didn't remove one tag. I don't know. I must have been playing with this. But other than that, right, we're doing the same thing, same task, same everything, except they're assigned to different users, right? And that's based on the query that's up here. So steps can be sequential in a workflow. They often are. In this case, these 2 steps are essentially running in parallel to one another. Remember, someone can only be in one workflow step at a time, so they're only going to match to one or the other. They can't possibly be in both, okay? So that's that. Okay. So I have a question here. If you don't check allow re-enrollment, is there any way for one donor to go through an action more than once? The answer to that is no, okay? They can't go through an action more than once. Now, I'm going to add an addendum to this because I know that we have to be very specific about talking about actions versus steps. Okay, so let me give you an example of something here. So this donor lifecycle workflow, this first step looks for non-donors, someone whose life-to-date gift count is 0, very basic. So they go through this workflow, they go through this step, they get all these emails. I haven't allowed re-enrollment here, so once they get to the end here, they're done. Now, again, just like we talked about before, there's no date boundary. There's nothing that unenrolls them here. They're out of stuff to do. There's nothing else that can happen. But if, let's say, 6 months later, I went back to this workflow and I said, you know what, I'm gonna adjust this a little bit. I just added letters on demand to my account. And so at the end of this year, I'm gonna add a delay and I'm gonna send them a letter. Well, all those folks who went through this, say, a couple months ago, 6 months ago, they've been through all these actions, but they've never been through that letter action at the bottom, so they're all gonna get that letter. Okay, so if they still match to the query, they can't go through the same action more than once, but hey, if you add new actions to that existing step, they haven't been through that action yet, they can go through it, okay? And again, that's not a re-enrollment sort of thing, that's because re-enrollment is really at the action level. Okay, so I added a new action, they can go through that again. That's a great question. Okay, can we use one of our organization templates for the workflows? Will it always upload the Virtuous template and we have to edit or update? 100% you can. Remember, when you are creating your own workflow, right? I come in and I create a workflow from scratch. So I come in here and I say, I'm going to make myself a new custom workflow. This is, my latest workflow, just to pick something there. That's not how you spell that. I need more coffee. There we go. We'll save that new workflow. Now I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add a step, and maybe this is another step, and I'm going to use my another step query. Yahoo. Oh, I've already used it in another one, so fine. Ugh, I have too many pretend workflows going on here. This is difficult. Fine. You know what? Just make a new query. Why not? But when I come in here to add an action, if I come in here to add an email, remember, you're going to search for any emails that you've already created in Virtuous Marketing. And I can't tell you enough, I always stress, if you're going to do this, create the emails first. Okay? When I'm in here on the workflow screen, this is final assembly. I'm almost at the goal line. 90% of the work happens before that. It's mapping out the workflow on a dry erase board or a Google Sheet or wherever I like to do things. It's crafting the queries, making sure I can identify the right people to target. It's creating the email copy and content, or creating the letters or postcards if I'm doing physical media, creating all that stuff. Then I come in here and I'm just pulling those parts together and I'm putting them into a workflow. Okay? So these emails should already exist in Virtuous Marketing. And then in Virtuous Marketing, like we said, really easy. You go into your template gallery, maybe you got your organization templates in here. I use this to create a new email, and I can pull it into my workflow. Now, the one thing to remember is when you do that, the system's going to create a new workflow version of that email. Okay? It's the workflow-specific version of that email. Remember, an email by itself is a one-time use item. Workflow emails are not. So the system's going to create a new workflow version of the email. I stress that because if you're going to come in and you're going to edit the email, you want to make sure the one you're editing is the workflow email. That's the one that's going to go out. Okay? But yes, 100% use your organizational templates to make this look like your emails. Just build the emails first, then you can pull them into your workflow pretty easily. And that's really the best way to do it. If you come in and you say, hey, I'm just going to add an action, and I'm going to add a marketing email, and let's create the email now. It's going to take you into the blank editor. You got to build the whole thing from scratch. Kind of stinky, right? Not the end of the world, but probably not what I want to do multiple times in building my workflow. Okay, so we had a question. Do I build automation emails in the email tab or the campaign tab? Well, we just looked at that. It's in the email tab. Okay, campaign tab is not where any content lives. Okay, you want to remember that. Campaign tab doesn't have emails in it, doesn't have call to action in it, all that stuff. The campaign tab is where I am tracking the structure of what I'm doing. Okay, so I do need to come in here and create it as a campaign communication, but that's not going to have any content in it. That's just saying, here's the communication that we're going to send out. What's the communication? Well, that communication exists in the email system. And down here, I can actually say, let me go find that email that I've already created in Virtuous Email, and I can add it in. Now, if I click on Add an Email, that lets me create an email right from here, okay? And that's just taking me as a shortcut into the email editor. That's all that that's doing. But if I'm on my campaign, right, and I got this fall membership e-blast thing, right, cool. If I hit add, again, it's going to take me into the editor. But on the email itself, I can link it to this campaign communication. Okay, so that says, hey, these two are structurally related. Same way when I create an automation, I can select a campaign. It says, hey, these two things are related. Okay, do you have an example of a donor automation with multiple workflows? How that works and why it's a good approach? I'm not real sure. I mean, you can have as many workflows as you want, right? A donor. So we already talked about how when I'm building my workflow, we looked at that major giver one and the steps that run in parallel. And we said someone can only be in one step at a time within a single workflow, but someone can be in as many workflows as I want, and that's good and bad. It's good, right? I mean, I'm not limited there. They don't have to just get one stream of communication at a time. It's only bad because that means they could be getting a whole mess of communication. Maybe I don't want to do that. And so I want to be cautious about that when I build my workflows. And I can use tags as a great way to exclude people from one workflow because they're in another, right? This donor life cycle is structured in here and it's applying these tags. So maybe once someone gets this first-time donor tag, I'm excluding first-time donors in another workflow because I don't want to cross the streams. Right? Maybe this non-donor tag, I also have a new contact tag that I add at the beginning and then I take off at the end. It says, hey, right now they're kind of protected. I don't want them also getting our newsletters and our e-blasts. I only want them getting this introductory stream of communication, and then at the end, they're fair game for whatever else you want to do, whatever else you want to send. So you can use tags to manage that or exclude people from one workflow or another. Each workflow should have a specific purpose. One might be designed at, again, celebrating first-time donors, celebrating donor milestones. Another one might be focused on identifying major donors or potential major donors. And so someone could have just given a gift, and I have a thank you workflow, and then I also have a major donor prospect identification workflow. Great, they could be in both of those because they're two different processes, both of which apply to that contact. Okay? So there isn't a blanket like it's good to have multiple workflows or it's bad to have multiple workflows. It all depends on the intent and the use case. Okay. So I know we're up against our time here. We do have a couple of other questions, so I want to make sure we can try to address these. If you guys have time to stick around, that's great. I'll try to answer as many as I can. I have a first workflow going. I need a second one to send a thank you email someone donates at the end of the first workflow. That's perfect. You could either do that in a new workflow or in the same workflow, right? Maybe I have a workflow where the first step is sending a bunch of emails to ask them to give. And once they give, the second step is thank you, you gave. To me, that's all part of the same process, right? And again, that's just coming in and adding a step. Then the name of the step, what's the query? Create that query to identify folks who gave. And the key here is to identify folks. So let's say I've got this stream of communication in step 1 asking them specifically for a gift, and I want step 2, this is the thank you not for anybody who gives a gift, it's the thank you only for these people who give a gift. Well, the way to do that or to identify that is segment code, right? So I've got segment codes tied in to all the donate buttons on these emails. If someone clicks that and they give, my second query is looking for anyone who gave a gift with one of those segment codes. So again, gift query to identify those gifts, because only a gift query knows about segment codes. And then nested into a contact query to identify who those contacts are and say thank you for those specific gifts. Okay. And then if I have another generic thank you sequence, I want that generic thank you sequence to be looking for any gifts except those to one of these 5 segment codes. So that way, there's a very specific and targeted thank you only for those givers. Okay. Can you give an example of what the query would look like if we wanted a workflow to capture anyone who is a non-donor, keep them in the workflow without them dropping out because they quit meeting the parameters? The only reason we want them to drop out of this workflow is if they actually donate, then they should start into the first-time donor workflow. Well, they'd only need to stay in the workflow for 9 months if you literally have 9 months worth of communication, okay? And the easiest way to do that is often to apply a tag, right, in step 1. So I identify like new contact, not a donor, easy peasy, and I tag them as non-donor. Great. And maybe I have a first email and a first touch point in step 1. Then I build a step 2 where the query says anyone who's tagged as non-donor. And then if I've got 9 months worth of communication going on there, hunky-dory, they can stay in there for 9 months until they give. Because then my thank you step, when they give, first thing I do, take off the non-donor tag. Now they stop matching. Okay. Tags are a great Swiss Army knife when you're stuck on how to accomplish something kind of tricky in a workflow. Okay. And again, they don't have to stay enrolled in the workflow. As a matter of fact, I generally don't want them enrolled if there's not something actively happening to them. Because it's not like if they're not in the workflow, they stop being a non-donor, they just stop getting communication from me. So unless they're actively being engaged, they're actually actively getting calls, getting emails, getting letters, getting whatever, I don't need them to just hang out in the workflow for 9 months. Doesn't mean they stop being tagged as a non-donor. Right? That's totally fine. So remember, I only need to keep them enrolled for a long period of time if I'm actually going to have that workflow send all that data, right, for 9 months, or send all that communication for 9 months. Okay. If you delete the original version of a workflow email, once the workflow is created, does that impact anything with your automation? No, not at all, because it's the workflow email that's being used for your workflow. So if you want to delete the original draft or whatever, totally fine. We had a question, is there a way to see at a glance which workflows the donor is in? 100% there is, right? So our friends again, Harry and Sally McSample, the lovely McSamples here. When I go to a contact record, there's a couple things. Number 1, over here on the left, boom, automation workflows. They're in this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and it tells me which step they're at. So they're in this one in the Solicitor X outreach step. They're in this one at the major donor step. Right? I can see they're in several, so I can load more there. And anytime automation activity happens, I don't know if I have any for them in here. Probably not. Who knows? But when automation activity happens, I'll actually see that in the communication history, and it'll have the little automation symbol, the little squiggle with the plus will show up here. So it will tell me, hey, this wasn't just a note that I added, automation did it. This wasn't just an email that got sent to them, automation sent it. So I'll know, hey, what's the latest automation action that happened to this contact? When I look at that record, I can also see what workflows they're in, and I can actually click on any of these to go to the workflow itself. Okay. Okay. We had a question about linking an email to a campaign. So remember, when I'm creating my email, there's a drop down there for segment. Okay. When I associate that email with a segment code, That'll associate it with the campaign communication that goes with that segment, and of course with the campaign that goes with that segment. Okay, so that was a lot of questions. I'm so glad. Hopefully this was helpful to address some of these questions here. And if you still have other questions, you know there's all sorts of ways you can reach out to us, either through the support messenger. We've got a lot of great content in the support section, right? There's an entire series of articles that walk through everything you ever want to know about automation right in here. You can check all that out, so please do lean on some of that. If you need to contract for additional one-on-one training, you know you can do that too by reaching out to support. Okay, and thank you guys for sticking with us a little bit past our time here. I do want to make sure I remind you this is something that happens every month. Next month, we're going to be taking a look at automation, but going to the next level, we'll dive into using direct mail, that letters on demand that we mentioned today. We'll look at really how that works, how you can use that, and some examples of specific workflows that use that letters on demand functionality to not just send someone an email, but to put something in their actual mailbox, right, to connect with your donor. And as always, I like to leave you with some thought from someone who might be smarter than me. Plenty of folks out there meet that description for sure. And this is a great quote from Taylor Shanklin. She actually organized something called the Nonprofit Innovators Club. You may have known they had a two-day sort of online symposium going on this week, actually, yesterday and today, talking about making, quote unquote, the digital pivot. Like I said at the beginning, a lot of people are really kind of pivoting to their digital fundraising now. So the combination of the best technology and today's marketing and engagement techniques is how we will move our mission forward in an online world. I thought that was pretty apropos given what we've been talking about today. We're really talking about automation and other tools that help you do this exact thing. Okay, well, thank you guys, everybody, for joining and for sticking with us a little bit over time this month. Again, this recording will be available in the Training Academy. That'll be available certainly by tomorrow morning if you want to share this with anyone else on your team. And if there's anything else that you need or any other questions that you have regarding automation, go ahead and reach out to our support team. We're here to help. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good one.